Okay, in video number 6 we will continue on talking about mobile data collection and go through the next sequence. So just to recap, what we did from the last video was we configured our project, and then we created this mobile data collection link, sent an email to my own email, but you would use yours, or if you're the project manager, it created a key for data entry. What I want to do now is just show you like what that email looks like. It comes from info@itreetools.org. This is auto-generated, and so don't reply to this. And then this is the actual link. You can see here the key again matches up. So these are things that you kind of want to start checking, because if you change your project configuration, the key changes. So you need to be careful with that if you make changes going forward at this point, because the data collection will get kind of messed up there. So let's go ahead and click this, and we'll let this launch a browser. This is launching right now. What I'm doing, I'm going to close the stuff in the background here, and we will just take a look at this in kind of isolation to see what it looks like. So again, here, this is just a web browser. All this is running in the background on Google Chrome in my particular case here. So it's not an application that you're installing on a device. This message that's coming up is just telling me that I had a previous key, and I'm using a new key. So if you're doing multiple projects, you will see this message. It's just confirming that you are changing to a new key. And this is just forms. So these are just web forms. You have to be careful. If you close these web forms and don't advance it, you can lose your data. So be very careful about that. So to advance the forms, you just put in your surveyor name, initials, and then log in. And then you can see how it just moves forward. Up at the top, there's an options key, and this allows you to change some of the settings. So if you wanted to work in circumference, diameter, or list more trees on a page than 10, you can do that. To go back, you just back out of this page. Project key, again here, if you want to confirm with your data collectors, if you made a change and you notice that there's a new key, you can just call your data collectors if they're working remotely from you and say, hey, I submitted a new key. Make sure this is the one that you are running, BA2F7950, before you proceed. Otherwise, we will have problems. So those are just some project management tips for you. Reloading project, be very careful with this, because this will wipe out any data that you have cached on the browser. So when you are collecting tree data, it's not storing it, it's just caching it in the browser memory. So you have to think about that. You want to submit data often, and make sure you just don't close out the web form. In some cases it'll stay there, but everybody's browser is different when you shut that down depending on your settings. So whenever I'm stopping or taking a break during the day, I'll stop and submit the data. It just goes to the server, and then once it's on the server, it's somewhat secure. So this is just some of the things that you can tweak around here. Submit data. When we're ready to submit it to the server, we'll walk through that one. So that is under the options menu. Now to proceed forward, we will just go ahead and hit the plus key. So what this has here is just the various menus that we have set up, and this looks a little bit different depending on how your project is configured. So you have in this one, general info, map coordinates. If we didn't have GPS turned on in project configuration, you wouldn't see this. Tree details, stems, which is where you enter the DBH. Management info, that's where you'll see that we have those options for putting in nursery stock, or or the stock type. So we have a few options available. All right, so let's just work our way through these menus. General information, this is where you do the species entry. This is very similar to what we saw in the manual data form, where you basically start typing and you see that it changes underneath there, so it's dynamically populating. So I have it on common name, and I was just putting a swamp white oak. and then we click on that to advance it. Next one here, stratum. So if you recall, we set this up to be stratified by these two different areas. So if we are planting on the actual school grounds, we will just make sure that we select that area there. And here's where you can enter some comments if you like. You have a photo option here. It does not store photos, so if you take a picture with your camera, that only exists on your camera. So the database and the server do not have that capacity to store photos. What you can just make is a note here is no, I didn't, or yes, I took a photo, number one, on my camera. So this is really just informational at best, not storage. And then we proceed. So every time you move forward with this and say save, that form is cached. And now we're on to the map coordinates. So if I were to go back to the general info, I should see that information that I had there. If you enter in some data and then go back without advancing it, it is not cached, and that's when you will lose some of the data that you've started. And when you first start working with this, don't go out and try to collect 250 trees and then submit it. Collect 5 and then make sure that you're doing stuff properly and the data is getting to the server and you're loading it in. You don't want to find out the hard way that you wasted a whole day in the field and you were missing an operation or doing something incorrectly. So start small, proof of concept, and make sure you're doing things properly. So the map coordinates, this actually has multiple options, and you can see here on a phone you'll see something similar that iTree wants to know your location. So on a phone you'll need to enable your location services to allow it to find you. And what you'll see here is that this actually defaults to where I'm at in south central Wisconsin. Now that's not where we're collecting data, so we're going to have to make a change here, and I'll enter in the actual address for this. Okay, so what I did is I just typed in George Washington High School, Chicago, Illinois, and then just hit the search feature. And you can see here, this looks a little bit more like where we were doing our tree planting project. And you can zoom in. What's nice about this is to the place where you might actually be doing your work as best you can. So we will, let's see, we were doing work kind of near this parking lot, and if we were planting in this location here. This feature right here, all I'm doing, we like to call this tap on a map. So if this tree was planted around this area, and that's where it is. And if it wasn't and you were wrong, okay, it wasn't really there, it was a little bit closer to this structure, then we can move it. So, you know, this is really nice as opposed to using a phone's GPS, because if you know where that tree was planted specifically, you could pretty much get that dead nuts on as best you can see it. If you're collecting data for trees that exist already, then you can actually even just click on those trees too. A little harder for the newly planted trees because you don't see them. So this is going to be reasonably within approximation of where those trees are. You can also use the phone's GPS, but that just could vary, and usually that is less inaccurate. So you have multiple options, or you can manually enter points too, which I suppose if you wanted to go that route for some reason, can't see why, but you can do that too. So you have 3 different options. The tap on the map is number 3. If you use this find my location, it will go back, and in my case it'll take me back to Wisconsin, so I have to manually kind of override that to get in the area. So that's the map coordinates. That's a real nice feature for collecting the GPS coordinates. And then we have the details. So here again, we didn't really have that much that we toggled on. We had the crown dieback. We're saying that these trees are say very, very good condition, if not excellent condition, so there is no dieback. I'm not going to go into details of collecting dieback. This is sort of somewhat subjective, but it's a way that you look at tip dieback to try to use that as a little bit more of a less subjective way than just trying to say, is a tree good, fair, excellent, which is kind of, it gives you some criteria at least, and then eco will kind of correlate this with good, excellent, fair, poor. So in most cases, unless a tree is doing pretty bad if it's newly planted, and sometimes you may not be able to tell and you're going to have to make a reasonable guess. So we'll say these are all just 0%, no dieback, perfectly healthy. Dead tree comes in handy if you are collecting information about all the other variables, and then it populates those and you can proceed rather quickly. So we have details and then we have stem. And so stem diameter, and again here if you recall that ECO allows you to enter up to 6 stems for multi-stem trees. And so in this case these are just, we're going to say single stem trees, and they're 1.5 inches diameter. What we'll say diameter at breast height is just kind of the standard measurement that ECO uses. You can type this in at 4.5. I know these are tree stocks, so you might be measuring lower to the ground, or you can leave it blank. It's something that you actually don't have to input for ECO, even though that's there. So that's something that could save a little bit of time. Why you have this there is if you have to go back and make measurements, and then somebody, if you're tracking change over time, you want to be able to go back to that exact same spot on that tree and take that measurement. So since this is based from a scientific protocol, this is why you have all these extra variables. Most people don't collect diameter height. And again, diameter height is just basically the measurement from the floor to where you're taking the diameter of the tree. Measured indicates that you actually physically measured that, meaning that, if you're collecting data on a sample plot, you might be looking over a fence and estimating something, or not be able to access private property, and you're estimating it. And so it just gives a project manager a way of knowing that something was physically measured in some way. Okay, so that's a lot about taking diameters. If we had a multi-stem tree with many stems, then we just hit plus to go ahead and add in those other stems. And in this case, we could just back out of there and then go back to the next tab. And so we have management information. And so again here, this was the drop downs that we populated with the data that we set up in project configuration. So you should see those same options there, and then we'll just select these two randomly to show that those were the data that we provided. And then we'll save that. And then we've gone through all these menus. If we wanted to go back, you certainly could. You can go back to details and change something if you thought, well, there was a little bit of dieback on this tree, it wasn't as healthy as we would like. You can do that. And then once you get to the point where you have all your data, then you just save it. Now, keep in mind, it's only saved to cache right here. And then if we wanted to go ahead and collect another tree, we could. So I'll go ahead and populate just a couple here before we send it back to the server, and then bring it into the project. Okay, I populated 5 trees. I just wanted to do one more so I could mention one thing about the species selection option. One of the things I mentioned is that you have to select the species, so you can't use unknown. It needs some information about the species in order for it to ecosystem services, but it will allow you to use a genus. Let's say if you wanted to use oak. So there's oak species. So you could use that. It's for ecosystem service estimates, it's not going to be as accurate if you were to actually enter in the specific species. So that's something to keep in mind. You might not always know what the species is, but you might be able just to enter in the genus. And if you don't know that, you also have the option of using hardwood or softwood if it was a conifer. So those are kind of the limitations of what you can do. You may find species often like cultivars aren't going to be in here, but you can select something similar, and that is probably will give you a reasonable estimate. So you do have some options for doing species that you're not going to find in here. So I'm just going to do a catalpa really quickly, and we'll just actually use the genus. And in this next section, I was going through and moving these actually over into the other strata. So I was planting these as if they were in row and park. So that way we'll just be able to see some differentiation there. and we'll save that. Okay, now before I submit these to the server, I still can go back and make some adjustments to these trees if need be. And I know that I was not careful in actually going through and changing the stratum option on those last three, as I wanted those to actually be in Rowan Park. So I'm going back to that last tree and then just updating that and then saving it through. So if you feel like you might have done something incorrectly or forgotten one of the data items or the optional items, you can always go back and look at that. And when I say save, again here, it just means it's cached on the device. It's not saved. If I were going to shut down for the day, I do not want to shut down this browser. So that's taking a chance that you might lose your data if somebody clears out the cache of the browser of this device you're working with. So we're going to go ahead and say that we're going to actually submit the data. And when I say submit it, again here what we're doing, it's telling us we have 6 trees. We're sending it to the server. So your data has been submitted, and let's say if we were taking lunch, we then would be ready for new trees. So this is clear, and you would see tree number 1 again as you start entering more data. Don't worry about the numbers. Eco handles that and kind of populates data after whatever's left on the desktop. So we can show you that if you have multiple people entering data in and they're all submitting it at the same time, Eco handles the numbering and will populate those trees and assign them new numbers. It doesn't actually allow you to enter in tree IDs to avoid overlapping or overwriting data. So that's kind of a bit of a long walk through the data collection process, but hopefully that helps. And again, you just have to kind of make sure that this is managed carefully, and if you make changes to the project configuration, realize that it's going to change the data collection and that key is going to change, and it's imperative that you make sure that your data collectors, if you change that, are not doing data collection at the same time, and then they will have to stop and then reload to get any updates that you change in the configuration if you toggled something else on, and then make sure they have that. So communication is imperative. There's not an easy way for the technical team to get your data back if it's not going to the right project anymore. Okay, we'll go back to the desktop in the next video and walk through the sequence of pulling data back into the desktop.